geopolitical power is pivoted more towards China, and also a big winner is the third great power, Russia. Russia's gained quite a bit, but the real strategic winner has been China, and let's talk just a little bit about the elephant in the room when it comes to commodity markets.
The world is in crisis, and the world is ever changing. The UAE just pulled out of OPEC, consumer confidence is at the lowest level ever, and we have to figure out who's actually winning in all of this. Is it the US? If I look at the stock market, the simple answer is yes. The question, though, is, are they? And I've invited back a fantastic guest on the program to discuss all of this. Where are we headed? What is the outlook here? His name is Professor Steve Henke. He's the professor for applied economics over at Johns Hopkins University. And I'm really excited to have him back and get his insights on where he thinks we're headed. We just had the Fed meeting yesterday. We got some indications of where the Fed might be headed here as well. And there's just so much to discuss, and we'll try to squeeze it into a quick 30-minute interview with Professor Henke. Before I switch over, though, hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps us out, and we much appreciate it. Now, Professor Henke, it's great to have you back on the program. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Good to be with you, Kai.
Yeah, really looking forward to the conversation. So much has been happening and is going on. And, with the crisis in the world, we need to figure out a little bit who's winning. We were supposed to do this interview 10 days ago, but we had to reschedule. I was going to ask you back then, and I think that question is still valid. Is the U.S., maybe the S&P and the stock market, the cleanest shirt in the hamper right now when it comes to investment opportunities?
Well, that seems to be what the market participants think. I think they're being a little bit complacent with everything going on. And I think the market is in bubble territory, so it's vulnerable for a takedown. So that's the setting of the table, basically. Whether it will be taken down is another issue. It's very hard to predict. In fact, no one really has a very good model for predicting when a stock market bubble is going to pop. And about the only thing that is pretty reliable is they pop when the central banks start tightening the money supply. So that's one thing that's about the only thing we know. The rest of it is just a random walk. You just don't know whether the bubble will pop, whether it will deflate very slowly and go back to kind of normal levels, or just what's going to happen. The only thing we know pretty certain is that when the popping occurs, it usually is associated with a monetary policy tightening of the central banks.
But that is not really happening right now, right?
No.
Looking at it, and the message we got yesterday was leaning towards easing and not tightening, perhaps, and increasing the Fed interest rate here.
Oh, I think you're exactly right, Kai. And that's what I anticipate, that the inflation genie will not be put back in the bottle, will not get down to the 2% target in the United States, because precisely the money supply has been accelerating for about 18 months, and it looks to me like they're going to let it continue to rip. And you have to remember that when we look at that, about 80% of the money supply, broadly measured by M2, for example, is produced by commercial banks. And commercial bank lending has been extremely strong, and profits at banks have been reported a couple of weeks ago. They were very strong, meaning the banks have more capital, more reserves, more firepower, and to lend, and they will, I think, continue to lend. That's one aspect. And the banking policy is to remove some of the restrictions that have been imposed on banks after the great financial crisis in 2008, So that will also give them more leeway, more firepower.
I'm trying to make a segue here to maybe talk about capital flowing back into the U.S. I'm trying to figure out if that's perhaps attractive because we got such loose lending policies in the U.S. Is that a factor why capital might be flowing back into the U.S.? Because if we would have spoken a year ago, we were talking about capital leaving the U.S. following Liberation Day here. Now, exactly a year later, it seems like money is coming back into the U.S. Is that maybe the loose lending policies? Is that a particular reason, or maybe the high interest rates?
Money's always flowing into the United States, massive amounts of money, and one of the reasons for that is the fact that we since 1975 we run a trade deficit, and if you run a trade deficit, you that's fine, but you have to finance it, and to do that, capital has to come in to finance it. So the capital's always flowing into the United States.
Is that because the U.S.
It's nothing new. It has to happen. But by the way, it's just arithmetic. If you run a trade deficit, you must have capital inflows coming in. You must finance it with foreign capital coming in, and the U.S. it's very easy to finance the trade deficits, and the reason for that is that the U.S. dollar and dollar-denominated assets are very attractive. If you look at the world capital markets, you see about 50% of all the capital markets are denominated in what? U.S. dollars. So this idea of de-dollarization and everything is pretty much nonsense. There's only one game in town. It's the U.S. dollar.
That's a perfect, I wouldn't say segue, but the perfect comment to follow up on, because has anything changed over the last 8 weeks? Has the U.S. strengthened its position in that regard? Like the de-dollarization trend, has it been stopped? Like the U.S. dollar as a world reserve currency was on its deathbed, according to many commentators, of course, right? Has that changed over the last 8 weeks?
Well, I think the narrowly looking at the dollar, the answer to that is no. It hasn't changed. What's happened, the big thing is that the U.S. is engaged with Israel in a war against Iran, and I think it's going to be one of the biggest strategic losses that the U.S. has ever suffered. So that all that gets factored in, at least at the margin. But remember, it is at the margin. These things chip away at the margin, and are negative vis-a-vis the U.S. But the big picture, standing back and forgetting the margin for a minute, is that it's very hard to get untangled from the giant that the United States is economically, and the currency, the United States dollar, is even a bigger giant than the United States. It just dominates everything in the financial sphere. And it's going to continue to do so. There's always been talk ever since Nixon closed the gold window in 1971, and there's always been talk about the U.S. dollar is gonna tank, and be thrown into the rubbish heap or something like that. We have these cycles and now we have a cycle going on, the de-dollarization cycle. The crypto people talk about it a lot, and the BRICS talk about it a lot, and China talks about it a lot, and Russia does, because they're receiving sanctions and being sanctioned. The most sanctioned country in the world is Russia, which of course it is bad for the dollar, and I'm against sanctions against anyone, but the fact is, there just aren't any alternatives out there that are very attractive. What are you going to go into? The Argentine peso?
No, not with 100% of my capital. I promise you that.
Yeah, I mean, it might be a speculative punt, but that's okay. Yeah. But it's a punt, and in the grand scheme of things, those punts are tiny little things.
If we zoom out, Professor Henke, in the end, like a couple of my guests mentioned that it's about the U.S. versus China, and I'm curious if those if the powers have shifted or the power has shifted a little bit. 12 months ago, I would have said, okay, China is holding the cards. They got the rare earths, for example, just as one example. So they got the U.S. by the throat. Now the U.S. seems to be more in the driver's seat, in my opinion. I'm curious what your thoughts are, and I'm trying to get that on a global basis. Has the U.S. or was the U.S. able to shift the balance of power, perhaps?
I think China is the big winner. There's no question about it, and it's always, when it comes to commodities, of course, the giant, the elephant in the room is always China. Whether it's rare earths, critical materials, or just base metals, or old-fashioned commodities, soybeans, you name it, it's China. And what's we're entering, I think, is a super cycle in commodities, with commodity prices increasing significantly.
So, Professor Henke, if we zoom out completely, it's really about the U.S. versus China on every single level. The question now I have, has the balance of power been redistributed? Like the U.S., I would have said 12 months ago, was maybe on the losing side. Has that changed at all in recent months?
Well, it has it hasn't, in the sense that the U.S. is still on the losing side, but losing big time now due to the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. I think the geopolitical power is pivoted more towards China, and also a big winner is the third great power, Russia. Russia's gained quite a bit, but the real strategic winner has been China. And let's talk just a little bit about the elephant in the room when it comes to commodity markets. You must look at what's going on in China to figure out any commodity, and I don't care if it's rare earths, critical materials, base metals, grains, pork, you name it, right across the board. So when we look at this meeting coming up in a couple of weeks between President Trump and Xi will hold all the cards, because the U.S. has basically run out of ammunition. They have no stockpile of ammunition or munitions left, because all of them have been either shipped to Ukraine in the proxy war with Russia, or they've been burnt through with the war against Iran. Now, to replace those, there'll be a massive replacement effort, but all of the weapons, almost all of them that are used, and we could go through them in some detail, which I've actually done in the last couple of days, require rare earths, and at least 95% of all the rare earths required will come from China. So we will not be able to restock the munitions that have been depleted in the United States without the permission of China, if you get the story. I mean, China will literally give us the permission either to do it or not do it. If they don't, we're not restocking. So that tells you where we're at in the power game. So you can bet your bottom dollar Trump is not going to be, spouting off when he goes to Beijing. He's going to be a good little boy.
Is that why perhaps he's keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed? Is that just to have a political and some leverage?
I think he's uninformed and has no idea what he's doing, and the Strait blockade will completely backfire and be a failure, because at the end of the day, who's going to control the Strait? Iran will control it. It's just a stupid policy, because look, he's basically doing Iran's bidding. Iran has made the Strait functionally inoperative since the war started. That has created a huge amount of collateral damage around the world. And the cause of that is Israel and the United States, because why did the Iranians close it? Because that's the counterattack. Their counterattack is to close it. It's created enormous damage, economic damage all over the world that'll be with us literally for years. And now Trump has done what? He's blockaded the thing. He's basically helping the Iranians accomplish what the Iranians wanted to do in their counterattack, which is impose so much pain on the world that the U.S. and Israel back off.
But isn't he using that leverage to against China right now, for example? Like, I'm just trying to figure out like who's holding what card and what can they play.
China has nothing to do with it. That's just a BS narrative. Okay. China's doing fine. It's gaining every day. This continues. China gains geopolitically. And the U.S. falls further and further behind. Why did we start this little segue, Kai, by saying that China was the big winner in the war? Now they're bigger. The longer this goes, and the more pain that's imposed around the world, the more people are going to be pivoting towards China and BRICS. And Russia, by the way. We've got three great powers in the world. The U.S., which is the biggest by far. Number two is China, and then three is Russia. So we've got those three. And who's winning and who's losing in the war? Well, the U.S. is losing big time, and Russia and China are winning big time.
No, we'll see how that plays out. Personally, I have another opinion. I'm thinking actually there's strategic sense to it, although it's really difficult to see. But that's my own personal opinion. That's why I'm curious how this plays out, especially in the conversations with China and who's holding the cards now, right? Because also the U.S. has done that deal with Indonesia to control or at least be or have access to the Strait of Malacca. I think it was so. So I find that very interesting. I find it a very fascinating topic, and I might actually be wrong on all of this. So I love debating it. It's fun. I do want to quickly cover one more topic, Professor Hankey. I know we only have a couple minutes left here, because I want to talk about your recent gold call of gold going back up to $6,000 between $6,000 and $7,000, and maybe tying it back to the beginning of the conversation here. What is driving that call originally, Mr. Hankey?
Well, the original call is to look at past peaks in the gold market and see what the price of gold is relative to disposable income per capita. And if you look at it on that basis, which is what I did, if you run the numbers and sharp pencil it, you end up with actually the real number originally at 6,600. So I thought, well, that's probably a little, maybe a little bit too high. Let's just make it an even number, 6. So I said 6,000. Everybody thought I was wacko then. Of course, the price shot up, and people, even at the mainline investment houses, started coming in with estimates around 6,000. So I thought, well, let's just make it 6 to 7.
Okay.
And it's still engaged, and if you look at the super cycle that I think is coming now, due in fact to many things, it's partly been stimulated by what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz, but also the rearmament. We talked about rearmament, whether it's talking about Germany or replenishing military supplies and ammo in the United States. All those things require what? Raw materials, critical materials, and so forth. So if you look at what's happening to things that I watch, like the ferrovanadium price since December of last year, up 90%. Molybdenum up 25%. Lithium up 39%. I should say lithium carbonate. Lithium hydroxide is actually up 49%. Spodamine's up 52%, tantalum up 133%, niobium up 28%, aluminum up 22%, tin up 21%, steel up 16%, and oil, we already know that's blowing up there. So I think you want to be looking at the markets. You want to start tilting out of the high tech and into the heavies again and into the commodities, because that's where the action's going to be.
Perfect. And on that positive note, we're going to end the conversation, Professor Henke.
Well,
tremendously appreciate your time. Like so wealth of knowledge. Like I could discuss with you for hours the flow rates, and because we could apply that to the gold mines as well, which have been really interesting. And what that means.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter whether it's as long as you got an in situ resource, the model works like a charm.
No, maybe we'll cover that separately in a different conversation. It would be really interesting, keen on that.
I'll send you my 1987 calculations on that as soon as we hang up.
That'd be fantastic. Awesome. Professor Henke, thank you so much for coming on SOAR Financially. Your wealth of knowledge, tremendously appreciate your time.
播报新闻是我的日常，必须时刻保持妆容和皮肤的最佳状态。当来到人生中最重要的时刻，也是 KS 逆时奇迹帮助我轻松驾驭，闪闪发光。KS 逆时奇迹活肤露全效精华、精华霜，多达5种 EGF 6大冻龄关键成分，保湿效果让我非常满意，小细纹也不再困扰我。我就是我自己的最佳女主角 ，KS 让我从容自信，光彩动人。我是我人生中的大女主，我的最爱我做主。KS 逆时奇迹系列热卖中，下单请上快点购，透过中天新闻网 App 下单立减50，或输入 CTI 推荐码有额外折扣。